This is A World on Purpose.
A purposeful life is the most important kind and the most valuable kind of life.
Every choice that we make makes a difference, for better or worse.
I loved walking in a village and seeing the before and after.
This is the podcast dedicated to those humans choosing to live larger by working for the greater good. And these are their stories. Stories of hope and of true change that come from living on purpose.
What if you were to suddenly say there are no challenges, there are only opportunities?
Regardless of where you come from, your financial identity shouldn't determine where you end up in life.
I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, and my hope is that my inspiring guests will take you on an introspective journey that helps you tap into your own pivot to purpose, bringing greater meaning to your life. Welcome to A World on Purpose. Hey everyone, thanks for coming back to A World on Purpose with me, your ever-enthusiastic host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, who just lives for the day when I get to bring you engaging stories about extraordinary humans that are discovering and really knowing and living their purpose, which, by the way, can happen at any age. That's exactly how it went for my guest today, Daniel Robinson, who was struck like a lightning bolt by his purpose as a very young boy. And he pursued that purpose with laser focus and with passion. Back when the movie Top Gun came out, a lot of people saw it and merely lamented on how cool it would be to join the service and become a fighter pilot. Heck, I honestly even thought about it for a minute. But then we all went on to do other things and live our lives. However, others saw that movie and were actually deeply inspired by that and other things in their lives, and in fact became one. That is how Daniel's purpose journey began, knowing that his purpose was to become an esteemed and sought-after Air Force fighter pilot. But there's a lot more to his story than that, with other powerful and life-transforming purpose pivots as well. Getting his MBA in business and working in finance was a serendipitous pivot that became a gift to help him navigate through a terrible family tragedy and a struggling family business. And that, in essence, led him to where he is today, with his technology company called Red 6. As CEO of Red 6, Daniel tactically applied all of the knowledge that he gained, both as a career fighter pilot and from turning a business around, to pioneer the first ever military air combat training company that's integrating augmented reality as a training mechanism inside the airplane itself. I mean, how cool is that? However, what really inspired my heart as well was Daniel's personal purpose story. And that story goes far deeper than the career track and extraordinary innovation that he's leading. As you listen to Daniel tell the deep and profound experiences of his remarkable personal journey, I know that you'll become completely immersed. Because his quiet confidence and humility, he speaks with depth and authenticity of what it means to be human. He shares tales of self-worth, of tragic loss, of recognition that mental health struggles are real for everyone, and what it means to allow yourself the safe space to know when you are struggling, and how important it is to acknowledge when we need help and take care of ourselves and actually get that help, which truly, in all honest sense of the word, makes you much stronger. From the outside looking in, it's easy to presume things about others, especially people in leadership roles running game-changing companies. But as you listen today, I am certain that you'll not only be blown away by Daniel, the CEO of this extraordinary game-changing company, but you'll also be endeared and feel incredible relatability to Daniel, the human being, who shows you that there is power in allowing ourselves to be human. So please take this adventure flight in storytelling today with me and Mr. Daniel Robinson. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world. I am your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris of A World on Purpose, and I really thank you for tuning back in every week the way you do to hear about these incredible purpose change-making heroes I say you don't know but should, that are doing something for the greater good. And today is no exception. I am so excited today to have an amazing human who is not just incredible in the work that he does, but also an incredible human being. His backstory is going to absolutely touch your heartstrings. And then you're going to be blown away by the company that he's created. So today, my guest is Daniel Robinson. He's the founder and CEO of an awesome technology company called Red 6. And Red 6 is a revolutionary technology firm at the forefront of synthetic air combat. And I'm going to let him talk about it because, my favorite thing to do, it's great to read people's bios, but I feel it's far more interesting to let my guests speak about what they do. But I will give you a couple little tidbits before I introduce Daniel. His company is actually revolutionizing live virtual constructive training by providing crucial capabilities to advance U.S. military and allied readiness across the globe. I'm going to let him tell you what that means. But just a little bit more information about his background. He was born in England, a really, really small little town that I'm going to let him tell you about. And he started his career out in the Royal Air Force, where he served as a fighter pilot, flying Tornado F-3 fighters. He also is the first foreign national to fly the F-22 Raptor. And additionally, he is also in 2005 was selected as the youngest fighter pilot of his generation to attend the prestigious weapons instructor course, the UK equivalent of the US Air Force Weapons School and the US Navy's Top Gun. So welcome my esteemed guest, Mr. Daniel Robinson. Daniel, welcome to A World on Purpose.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the gracious introduction. Makes me sound way more impressive than I actually am. So.
No, you are definitely impressive. But what I'm really, really excited about is you kind of know what we're trying to accomplish here at A World on Purpose, which is really the idea of helping people feel like if they're lacking meaning in their life or they want to add greater meaning to their life, to what they do, what does it mean to step into their purpose, which you have done just extraordinarily in spades. And we often start with on the show what I call your purpose origin story and your pivot to purpose. And when I first saw you interviewed, I don't know you. I know a lot of my guests personally, but I did get to know you sort of virtually through all of the research that I've done. And we have a connection of Kelly Purdue, who I met many years ago through a company I was working with. And I saw what you were doing. And I actually saw an interview where you talked about your backstory. And so I would love for you to share that first before we get into the work that you've done, the extraordinary work with Red 6. So, sir, the stage is yours.
Yeah, happy. I appreciate the opportunity, and I really appreciate the purpose of your podcast. So congrats on something that I think is really important.
Thank you.
So way of background, as you alluded to, I was born in England, in a very small town in the northeast of England, synonymous with coal mining and shipbuilding. And I guess there wasn't much to do in that town from being a little boy, right? But we did have one movie theater. And so the story goes, my dad would take me to the movies on occasion, and we'd go into the movie theater. And I remember 3 movies that were kind of instrumental in my life, right? The first movie I ever saw was Superman, the original, with Christopher Reeve as Clark Kent and Superman. And when having visions of Superman flying through Manhattan, and my Superman, I always liked him saving cats and trees. I didn't want him fighting superheroes and stuff. It was just all the nice stuff he did around Manhattan. I thought was great. But those images of him flying through Manhattan down Fifth Avenue really inspired me. I think the real spark that inspired a love affair with flight, right? And so much so that I'd come out of that movie theater, and my mom and dad would tell me I'd spend hours in the garden with a tablecloth around my neck, standing like this, concentrating really hard, and roll myself into the air. I'm not understanding the concept of gravity at that point in time. But it really, and then they'd I'd be running along anything high, and I'd dive off it and try to fly, and they'd always be catching me. So that was kind of the genesis of my love affair with, I guess, flying and aviation. The next movie I remember seeing was Star Wars, and whilst I thought lightsabers were cool, I thought X-Wing fighters were really cool. So I had imagined myself building, flying X-Wing fighters through the Death Star, and I'd spend hours outside in the garden playing in the mud, and I'd build myself X-Wing fighter cockpits with stones for switches and sticks for control columns, and I'd sit there imagining myself as Luke Skywalker flying around. And then the third movie I saw was one that we'll all be familiar with, Top Gun. When I saw Top Gun for the first time, I was blown away that was actually a job. And I think I may have been 12 years old at the time. Mm-hmm. And the notion that being a fighter pilot was a job. So I started looking into it, and I thought, well, that looks also pretty risky, although extremely exciting. And so I guess I may be killed if I do that job. So I remember being 13 or 14 years old and having a conversation with myself early one morning, sitting in the living room with my dog at the time and saying, look, Dan, all right, you're going to make a monumental decision here. You're not going to be afraid of dying anymore. And you're going to see if this is something you can pursue at age 13. So that was really when I really discovered I had a purpose at that point in time. And I consider myself very lucky because where I grew up, there were a number of distractions, and it would have been easy for me to, disappear off the rails. And so I went through schooling and all of the stuff you go through in the UK. And I remember telling a teacher of mine as a kid, we were doing a class in school, and at the school I went to was not great, to put it mildly. And we were doing a class which was, what do you want to be when you grow up, basically? Mm. And, I guess horizons in that area weren't particularly high at the point in time. And I was writing it down. We had to write it out on a piece of paper, and he would read it out in front of the class. And I gave him a piece of paper, and he got to mine, and he said, he looked and he smiled, and he said, Mr. Robinson, come and stand up here. And I thought, fantastic. He loves it. He loves what I've put down. And he looked at me, and he looked at the class, and he said, Mr. Robinson thinks he's better than everyone else. Mr. Robinson wants to be a fighter pilot.
Oh my God.
He looked at me and he said, go sit down and write something sensible. And I was obviously humiliated, and all the kids were funny. So I sat down, I was mortified, and he said, come on, hurry up. And he was reading the rest of the guys and girls out. So I wrote something again. I thought, well, maybe this will do it. So I gave it to him again, and he brought me up, and he looked at me, and he opened it, and he smiled, and he said, get out of the classroom. And he said, 10 laps to the playground in the pouring down rain. Because that second piece of paper said I want to be a fighter pilot. Mm. And so I remember doing laps to the playground in the pouring down rain, and the kids laughing at me. And I remember thinking, my gosh, like, way to crush a young kid's dreams and hopes and aspirations. But it kind of had the opposite effect on me. It ignited a spark in me that became a fire, that became a passion, that just became a ferocious drive to go and achieve this. And the absolute juxtaposition of that was I had taken a job as a kid at about the age of 14 and 15 to be a milkman and deliver milk. So I'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and milk and deliver pints of milk on a morning, running around the houses miles and miles before I'd go to school, and then I'd go to school and study. And I was saving my money up to do flying lessons. And I went for a flying lesson, and there was a gentleman that became the opposite to me. He was an absolute mentor, and he put his arm around me and told me he thought I had a little bit of potential, and that, to believe in myself. And he guided me through a process which ultimately got me a scholarship to the Air Force Academy in the UK. And off I went into flying training. So I was lucky enough to be selected, and I get a pilot slot. And I was super underconfident as a kid. So I'd come from the northeast of England, which is kind of the area I came from specifically was written up in the Economist, I believe, as the Detroit of the UK.
Wow. Mm.
So it kind of gives you an idea of where I was coming from. And I just felt, as a young kid, a little inferior to everyone else, right? So I was surrounded by all of these great guys and girls that were, fantastic intellects and highly educated from great parts of the country, that I just felt out of my comfort zone. And so begins 4 or 5 years of, long and difficult training, and always underconfident. But as I went through this training process, slowly but surely people would start to vanish, and they'd be cut from training, and you keep moving on and moving on and moving on. And at the end of this process, I guess by the skin of my teeth, I clawed my way through, and I pop out of the other side, and all of a sudden I've achieved this lifelong dream of being a kid of, I'm flying fighter jets for the Royal Air Force in England, and I'm flying Tornadoes.
So cool.
Yeah, I mean, just incredible. Something I, could only have imagined as a kid and dreamed of. But that's sort of the first purpose I had in life. It was a clear, articulated goal that I could work towards, and that really sits well with how I function as a human being. And I get combat ready around the time that 9/11 happened, actually. And 9/11 happened. So the first part of my career was against the backdrop of operations in the Middle East. So deploy, come back, et cetera, et cetera. And after about 3 years on the front line, I suppose I was reasonable with the airplane. I was still relatively inexperienced, but I had an aptitude for, I guess it was, you'd call it to the labor, like dogfighting, the kind of stuff you'd see in airplanes rolling around each other and stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
That's one of many skill sets that a fighter pilot has to have. But I was decent at that. And my squadron commander came to me and asked me one day if I'd be interested in applying to fighter weapons school, which you call it here in the US, which is the equivalent the Navy call it Top Gun. And to be clear, that school has a ferocious reputation. Right? Everyone's scared to death of going. It's really difficult. And I was really, really young and relatively inexperienced. And when I look back at that point in time, I probably wasn't experienced enough to go. I was talented, I was pretty good, but I was just lacking that kind of experience. And it was a big risk to me to go there and take that chance. But I knew that it was kind of one of those doors that you would choose to either step through or not step through in your life. And, if I failed, it would obviously be a blow, but I had gone early. And if I passed, it would set me up on a largely different trajectory to my career. So I went to school, and boy, did it live up to its reputation. It was difficult. And I think, I mean, to say that I got through by the skin of my teeth is an understatement. And I think on a very good day, I may have been assessed as average, right? But I did manage to make my way through the course. And you come out at the end of that course and you're so beaten down by, high level instruction, right? These guys are world-class operators that were, just highly, obviously super critical environment to be working in, and because we're striving for perfection, which is always elusive and you never get there. But I come out of that school and actually when I go back to the squadrons, you realize actually you've learned quite a bit and that you have, stepped up your game to a certain extent. And that opens up a number of opportunities for you. And one of the big opportunities that it opens up is quite often you can be a candidate for high profile exchange tours between allied nations. And of course, the United States have the most appealing exchange tours. Well, I don't know. The French and the Italians are quite good because you get to live in France.
Let's not leave them out.
Good wine. But, in terms of, professional competence and the benchmark, exchange tours to the United States were highly sought after. So I had applied to a US Navy exchange to fly F-18s over here off the carriers. That's the living the Top Gun dream, right? If I can do that, the journey will be complete. And
right, for sure.
I was on the short list to do that. I think there were 3 guys that were on the short list, and it's a wonderful story of me coming in after night flying one night, and we're in the squadron bar, and the squadron commander got the whole squadron around for this big announcement. And I thought I had a really good chance of getting this exchange, And so he made this big announcement. He said, Dan's worked hard. He's been to weapons school. You can expect good deals. Well, here we have the announcement. You all know he's applied for the F-18 exchange. And we were waiting for it. And I thought, this is it. I'm going. He said, unfortunately, on this occasion, he's been unsuccessful.
Oh, no.
Oh,
ouch.
Yeah, very publicly, right? And I thought, first of all, that sucks. Second, why would you do that very publicly? And thirdly, I was in the bar with my friends and they all started consoling me, and he let me sit with that. And then he came up with a wry smile and he said, hang on, guys. He goes, I have another announcement. He goes, there's a reason Dan hasn't been selected for the F-18 exchange. And the reason he hasn't been selected for the F-18 exchange is he's just been selected as the first non-American fighter pilot in the world to go fly stealth fighters for the US, the F-22 Raptor. And
that's wonderful.
Guinness, and I dropped my pint of Guinness on the floor. And around the trees in the UK, right? So the whole squadron pile on me and beat the crap out of me on the floor. And I come up and I look at this guy and I said, is this true? And he said, yeah. And he pulled me up by my hand and he said, young man, this opportunity is going to change your life in ways that you don't even know yet. And boy, was he right. And so 4 weeks later, roughly, I leave the UK and I arrive in the United States, and I'm learning to fly F-22 Raptors, the most capable airplane in the world by a mile.
Wow.
And, being this kid from the northeast of England and now flying a $200 million stealth fighter over the Gulf of Mexico was something I could never have imagined. So I I find myself rapidly after that at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, and relatively quickly I become an instructor on the F-22 and spend 3 incredible years with the F-22 community. And of course, that was a huge privilege.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of that exchange, I suppose I was, the expectation would be that I'd go back to the UK and rejoin the RAF, and I guess bring that stealth expertise back to the RAF in anticipation of the new airplane, the F-35, coming online. But to the core of what it is we're here to discuss, and a world with purpose and my own purpose in life, I felt that my pathway was not to stay in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an incredibly difficult decision for me because, I'd been given a tremendous opportunity to fly the F-22.
Mm-hmm.
The expectation, I suppose, would be that I'd go back to the UK and pick up with the RAF. And for me, it just never felt like it was the right thing to do. I loved flying airplanes. I loved the people I worked with. I loved the job. But I was fundamentally kind of anti-authority, and the sitting within the military just, it never sat well with me. I really hated being controlled, and I hated not having my own liberties and all that kind of stuff. And I was just bursting at the seams. My soul wasn't connected to my body in that sense, right? I was
Mm-hmm.
really uncomfortable. So I thought, look, at some point someone's going to tell you to stop flying airplanes, and it's my life, it's my destiny. I want to be absolutely in control of that decision. And if I'm going to step down and stop flying airplanes, then I'm going to step down from flying the best airplane in the world, because anything after that, frankly, was just not as good. And so I made the decision not to go back and to leave the military. I think in addition to that, I'd fallen in love with the United States, quite frankly, and really believed in the cause and what and the Constitution and everything that was and embodies the United States. I really bought into and fell deeply in love with this country. So much so that I elected to stay in the US. And I subsequently went to graduate school at Georgetown, which was a wonderful experience. Got to meet another great bunch of people. And off the back of that was offered a job in New York City. And it was a big transition to go from what I'd been doing, flying, fighter jets, stealth fighters with some extraordinary people, to working in an investment management company in New York. But I viewed it as an incredible sort of landing pad, and I really wanted to go live in New York and follow that dream. And so I figured I'd take it as a landing pad out of business school and go do that. And I did. And it was a wonderful experience of living in New York City. But it was also an incredibly important experience from a personal perspective, because I absolutely hated the job and the work I was doing. And whilst on the surface, it looked like a wonderful career choice and a great package and compelling salary and all of the stuff you'd associate with good professional career choices, my soul was destroyed going into work every day and sitting in a cubicle. And
I can imagine.
I really understood that it was an important decision that I'd taken, but it was the wrong decision to go do that. It was a tremendous education, but I was becoming deeply unhappy and really unfulfilled. And I really felt that I was not being truthful to the core of who I am as a human being. And I wasn't on a pathway following something that was meaningful to me at all. And it was unsustainable. Ultimately, it would come to an end in pretty drastic circumstances. And I was sitting in New York one night, and my father back in England had started a firm which had grown to be a fairly big employer in this town that I was from in construction development. And you have to understand, this is kind of 2011, 2012 timeframe. And my dad and I's relationship, I suppose, had been, I can describe it as complex. My dad was an incredibly complex man, so it was a complicated relationship, both in the good sense and in the bad sense as well. And the year or so before, it had been a particularly difficult sort of relationship between the two of us. And he called me up one night, and this was in the middle of the financial crisis, and he said, "Hey, son," he said, the business is in a lot of trouble. We're going bankrupt, and I'm really lost. My dad had struggled with, I guess, manic depression as a result of childhood, and that had had a severe impact on him. And so his mental health wasn't good. It wasn't healthy at all. And I could see him really, really struggling and shouting for help. And he said, "Can you come back and help me?" This was on the Monday night. I actually had a broken shoulder from a surgery I'd had at the time, and I said, "Hey, Dad, I can come back and help you, but I'm going to have to go to the hospital tomorrow, get the stitches out from my shoulder, and I'll be on the first flight back. I'll be back with you on Wednesday morning." And he looked at me, and the last thing he said to me that night on that phone call or that Skype call was, "Son, I'm not sure that's going to be soon enough."
Oh.
I thought he was referring to the business. And I went to sleep that night, and the next morning I woke up, and it was an inbox of emails, which was unusually long from the UK. "Please call me, please call me, please call me." And I woke up to the news that morning that that night my father committed suicide.
Oh, dear God.
Taken his life over in the UK, knowing that I was coming back to the UK. And to say my world and the world of my family and a lot of people in the UK was turned upside down in that moment is an understatement. And I realized in that moment that life had given me another purpose that was really important. And that was to go back and obviously take care of my family, my mom, and I have 3 sisters. But I realized in that moment I just basically inherited a business with 200 employees that was bankrupt in the middle of the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression.
Oh, my gosh.
My dad just committed suicide. And I was about to leave New York, and I think, as an adult, I think I just recently started a new relationship, which I thought was okay. Maybe this was, the relationship of my adult life for sure. Certainly having left the military. So the timing of it was really, really difficult for me. And I flew home that day and walked into hell, basically. And of course, I walk into the house, and my mom collapses in this arm, my sister collapses in this arm, and the police are there, and it's very public, and it's all over the press. And the banker looking at me saying, "Hey, you're in a lot of trouble." And I said, "Yeah, I'm aware. Give me a little bit of time." And so I went to work, and I got with the team, and I asked the management team to call a meeting of the whole company the next morning. And I got in front of the company the next morning and said, "Look, guys and girls, this is me. Some of you know me from being a kid, having grown up with you, because a number of you have been here 30 plus years. Some of you don't know me. And we're obviously a family business, and there's insight and relationships that you had with my dad and my family that are particularly close, but there's always been limits. And today I have to give you full insight into what is happening and just come clean. The truth is that my father had struggled with a lifelong battle with manic depression, and yesterday he took his life. And you have to understand, he was loved by these people.
Sure, yeah, of course.
200 burly builders, right? And every one of them's upset, crying. And I said, "And look, the business is in a tremendous amount of trouble, and but I know how to get us out of this, right?" Yeah, I didn't have the first clue how to get us out of this, but I knew I had to. I had to inspire them in that conversation to follow them. And I said, "So it's going to involve a lot of sacrifice, but I promise that no matter what you guys sacrifice, I'm going to sacrifice more. And we're going to make some very difficult decisions, and we're going to be focused on a mission, and that mission is to A, survive, and then B, transform this business." And so, cutting a very long story short, I spoke to the bank. I said, "Please back me, give me a month to write a business plan, and let me see if we can turn the ship around." And God bless them, they did. And I spent 5 very long, very difficult years clawing my way out of the trouble we were in, and ultimately building a new team around me that were way better than I was, and scaling the business to a point where ultimately we were able to exit the business and take care of a lot of people's pensions and jobs for the long term. which was an extremely difficult, extremely traumatic process to go through personally.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Ultimately, we did something that I look back on that I'm extremely proud of. And it was kind of the second great purpose in my life, right? Of having down from having stepped out of the military and that focus on flying airplanes. It was now, here's a purpose. I know what I have to do. And so we did that. And but quite honestly, it came at great personal cost to me as well, because the rest of my life was put on hold for a long time.
Sure, of course.
So I had to get back to my life. And it was very interesting because, you know, when you lose someone like that, or you go through these experiences in your life, it causes you to reflect and I think ask yourself the difficult questions of what is important in life? What does life mean to you? And it occurred to me that we're always trading the balance between two things, right? It's like financial independence and money and resource versus time. So I think I framed it as all the money in the world with no time is literally worthless. And all the time in the world with no money is very difficult. So somewhere in the middle is a value proposition that makes sense, and that's conducive to happiness. And so with that framework in mind, I started asking myself the fundamental questions of what does happiness mean to me? And what, if I knew when the end of my life was coming, how would I spend my time? And I answered it very simply. There's a number of things I love, but like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is one. I'd spend time doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'd spend time nurturing my friends. I'd spend time in the ocean. I'd get see as many sunsets as I can. I'd eat good food. I'd drink good wine, and I'd try to do something that I'm really deeply passionate about. And I will not do anything that doesn't fill me as a human being again. Ever. And I won't work with people I don't want to work with either. And so I started thinking about the next step. And the next step ultimately led me to the purpose that I guess we're going to talk about here in a second. But I started that by going back to my love affair with aviation and my passion. Thinking, look, I remember I used to fly airplanes, and I've been doing it since I was a kid. And I used to be pretty decent at it. And maybe I should go back to flying. So I went to Santa Monica Airport, and I walked in there, and I said to this kid, "Hey, I'd like to learn to fly." And this 21-year-old kid took me flying and said, "Okay, here's a turn, and here's and he said, 'Oh, you're pretty good.' I was like, 'Thank you.' And he took me in from the first ride and said, 'I think you've got some potential as a pilot. You should consider a career in aviation.'" First time I've ever heard that in my career, right? So I thought I'll take it.
That's hilarious.
I've got to tell you something about my background.
That's great. Daniel, I mean, like, I just can't even, I have so many words. I want to come back, and I want everyone to take a break for a minute and sit with everything you just shared, because it's extremely profound on every level: personal, professional, emotional, humanitarian, like everything you can possibly imagine. That was so beautiful. And I thank you so much for sharing that. And we're going to just take a quick break, because now I'm going to get into asking you some questions about what you just shared. And then we're going to dive into how all of that led to this incredible purpose that you're living now with Red 6. So thank you for sharing that. Everyone, please take a break for a minute. Take a breath. That was such beautiful information. And we like to do this on A World on Purpose so you can sort of absorb these origin stories. Come back with us in just a minute, and we'll dive right back into it with Daniel Robinson of Red 6. Thank you, Daniel. Okay, everyone, thanks for taking a break and then joining me again with my extraordinary guest, Mr. Daniel Robinson, founder and CEO of Red 6. If you were listening earlier, he was sharing his extraordinary backstory, remarkable on every level in terms of his career advancement, but also the story of the loss of his father and all of the things that led him to where he is now with Red 6. I did not want to interrupt you because that was such a powerful story, but I just have a few things I want to ask you before we get into Red 6. And also, towards the end of the show, I usually like to ask my guests to share a little more deeply about some of the challenges you discussed and the things that you did along the way to keep you going when those things got tough. But I just wanted to say a few things. One, first of all, having grown up in immense poverty myself, which you may or may not know, homeless as a kid, and having an experience of telling what I wanted to be when I grew up, which I wanted to do everything to help people my whole life. And the only way I thought to do that was to be president, which I didn't even know what that meant. So I said I wanted to be president. My teacher also said, honey, you might want to pick another career because little girls can't be president. So I get that. And I love that it fast forwarded to that moment you shared where you felt like you were being potentially publicly, admonished again, humiliated, when it really ended up being life affirming for you. Like, no, you are amazing. We are putting you in front of something that no one in your role has ever done. And I just love that so much. And it must have been absolutely like, did you have a memory of that being a child when your teacher told you that in that particular moment? Like, did you ever reflect back on that?
I reflect on it all the time, and I always get asked, "Did you ever go back and tell that teacher?"
I'm sure. Oh yeah.
I never did, because I didn't have to. Right? It was not, they're a product of their own background, upbringing. But it goes to the point of things like, what is a mentor to a child, right? It can be like the softest touch, or the pat on the shoulder, or just kind of a quiet word in the ear is enough to shape a child's life. If they haven't got a support network around them, it's enough to shape a child's life in a really positive or negative sense. And
sure,
the damage that those kind of things can do to children if they haven't got support networks around them is immense. And you juxtapose that with this other guy that put his arm around me and said, "Look, you've got some talent, young man, and why don't you go believe in yourself and do this?" And so I often think about it in that context. And I never did go back to tell the guy. It was tempting, I'll tell you. But it was, I'm sure he was aware.
Yeah. And I wouldn't think you'd want to go back and say it either, but in your own mind, it just must have been so affirming. Like, with the things we tell young people at the earliest, most formative years of their life are so impactful and profound. And I love that was the thing that actually inspired you to be like, because I felt the same way. I was like duly crushed. And at the same time, like, no, I'm going to show you. Now I wouldn't want to be president, actually, because I feel like I can make greater change outside of politics. But the other pivot that I loved, that I thought was so fascinating, was, which ended up being an asset to what you went through with your father and having to take over that business, and eventually probably translated to how you're running Red 6, was that intuitive sense of, if I can't fly anymore, I'm going to try something else. You stepped into business. And even though it was something that you didn't love doing in terms of finance, did you find that having made that unintentional pivot was something that actually helped you get your father's business after that incredibly sad, horrible loss, which I am deeply so sorry for? Did that not help you in some strange serendipitous way be able to know how to do that? If you hadn't, would you feel you would have been able to have been as successful just because you're so savvy, or was that serendipity?
I don't know if I'm savvy at all, but I will frame it in this context. There's a wonderful passage, I think it was a speech, or maybe it was in his book by Steve Jobs, right, where he talks about connecting the dots. And I'm paraphrasing, and I'm going to slaughter it, but the essence of what I'm describing is true. So Jobs argues that it's very difficult to connect the dots looking forward in your life, right? So you have to have a passion or a purpose and pursue that with every ounce of your being, and know that at some point you'll arrive at an intersection in your life where you'll look back and those dots will connect, and you'll be in the right place at the right time with the right experiences to do what is being asked of you, or capitalize on an opportunity that may be in front of you. And when I look back and reflect on my own life, and I think about the building blocks that have been put in place all the way to Red 6, and I go backwards, I go, well, if when Dad died and I took the company, I'd had obviously all of the experience of being in the military and the really top level leadership and management, culture and training, and just surrounded by world-class human beings that to see how professional organizations are run. So I'd had all of that experience. I'd been fortunate enough to go to business school, and I had the context of an academic education. And then I think, a year or so in New York working in investment management gave me an exposure to another culture and another skill set of experience levels that whilst I hated it, when Dad died, I realized actually I was in the right, that moment that I got the news, I realized the dots are connected in my life, right? And I was at the right place at the right time with an experience set and skill set that I could bring to bear. And the real question when I looked myself in the mirror at that point was, did I have the character to stay in the fight and do what was best of me? And I had to answer that honestly and say, yeah, I did, and I wanted to step into that fight and go execute against it. Those dots connected again because the journey through that business was extremely difficult, right? It is like being at business school and being given the worst case study of it.
I'm sure.
Top to bottom. And then they say, okay, we need you to go fix that company, turn it around, transform it from top to bottom. And oh, by the way, you've just lost your dad to suicide. You've left New York City. You've left this person that you were in love with, and you are gay now, and you're in a dogfight, the proverbial dogfight. Have you got the character to stay in there and execute? And so those dots connected for me, and I engaged in that fight. And I had to believe that experience was shaping me for something else. And so when we fast forward now to Red 6, and I arrived at this opportunity that was presented with Red 6, which is a story in itself of serendipity. Again, I look up to the sky and I smile and I go, I'm not quite sure what your plan is here, but you seem to have kind of given me a tremendous amount of experience that is all coming together now. And now a purpose and a passion that, yes, this is unequivocally me. And I draw on all of this experience and focus it on this purpose, something I'm deeply passionate about. And so that's a long-winded answer to your question, but it's the way I kind of view it through that prism of connecting the dots in my life.
Yeah, I love that too. I had a very similar career path. I actually used the example of an Etch-a-Sketch. Like I didn't have a linear career path. It was these crazy concentric circles that didn't seem to make any sense at the time that have all culminated back to making sense. And so that's a great place for us to finally get into this extraordinary company that you've created, which I have friends that are aviators in the service. I've learned a little bit about how that works. And I love that you've been able to intersect all those dots together to create it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what Red 6 is and that serendipity that led you there and how it's serving a purpose, not just in the world, but obviously specifically for the safety and the efficacy of military air combat.
Sure. Well, the genesis of Red 6, I didn't realize it at the time, but it was back in 2006 to 2009 when I'm flying F-22s. And so I'll explain this in a lay person's terms because it's really an effective way of kind of articulating what the value of this company is. Every time fighter pilots go to fly and train, they need someone to go fly and train against, right? A multi-billion-dollar a year problem. And to provide those aircraft, you need A, the aircraft, B, the pilots, the fuel, the supply chains, the logistics. And that costs a lot of money, right? We as the West, the Allied nations, the United States and the UK, etc., have been involved in counterinsurgency warfare in the Middle East for the last 20 to 30 years, supporting the guys and girls on the ground. And that has been extremely important. But during that period of time, you've seen a major shift in the balance of power within the world, right? And what I'm talking about here is the reemergence of Russia onto the world stage as a state actor and some of the nefarious stuff they're doing, right? But also export of sophisticated technology around the world into less than friendly hands. And critically, the rise of China. And China, in my view, have aligned a long-term geopolitical strategy, only regional right now. They've aligned that to a concerted, systematic mobilization of their defense industrial base. And they're working with the military and industry and academic institutions to build extremely credible military capabilities. Why do I articulate that? I articulate that because that poses a direct threat to the West and to the United States and its interests around the world, and to the stability of the region. And so to counter that, we need to be able to deter aggression, and we deter aggression through strength, right? And we convey strength by being credible, and we're credible by training. And so when I go back to this problem of adversary aircraft to train against, even if we had the pilots, the dollars, the airplanes to go do it, the pace of innovation coming out of China is such that we couldn't replicate the kind of threats that we may be called to go against anyway, because they're too advanced, and we don't have those airplanes that can simulate that type of stuff. And so I wanted to do something about that, right? And I've been noodling on this problem for a while. Now, it is a serendipitous story in itself, but I alluded it before the break. I'd gone back to flying. And in the midst of learning to fly again, quote unquote, I met a gentleman called Dave Onnenberg, who was responsible for the design and creation of this beautiful experimental airplane, home-built amateur airplane called a Berkut. And I saw an example of this airplane every day sitting in the hangar at Santa Monica whenever I walked through for flying lessons. And I got to meet Dave and chatted and marveled at his airplane. We struck up a friendship over a period of time, and I would just spend time with Dave, and I'd work as a mechanic, and he'd teach me about his airplane, and I'd fix him, stripping it, and just really learning and hanging out, and just my love affair with aviation. And one day I decided that for a passion project, I was kind of lost, frankly, having stepped down from this great purpose of turning a company around in the UK. I was in a position where I didn't necessarily have to work at the time, but my soul was kind of restless. I didn't know what my purpose was again in life. And I wanted a purpose. And I started thinking, look, I don't know why, but life is telling me to build an airplane. And it's ridiculous, because everyone knows you don't build your own airplane, right? The average of all the people that start building their airplanes, about 25% of them actually start building them, having bought the kits. About 25% of those airplanes are ever completed, and they say on average, it takes about 10 years to complete an airplane. And it will cost you about 2.25 relationships per airplane that you go through. And that's about right. So this made absolutely no sense at all, but life was telling me to build this airplane. And so one day I approached Dave and said, "Hey, Dave, I'd like to build an airplane." "Great," he said. I said, "Yeah, I'd like to build a Berkut. Would you help me?" And he said, "Absolutely not." I said, "Oh." And I said, "Okay, why?" And he said, "Damn, this airplane has cost me a lot. It's commercially it wasn't successful. I poured my heart and soul into it. It hasn't been a success. There's been a number of accidents, and his best friend was killed in a Berkut demonstration. He was a demo pilot, former fighter pilot himself. Actually, ironically, back around about the time when I joined the Air Force, which is kind of." So he said no. And so I just backed off. And he said, "And look, there are no kits available. We only ever manufactured 70. They're all missing. No is the answer." So I backed off. And a couple months later, I walked into the hangar. His airplane was outside. And he said to me, "Look, jump in the back seat." And I said, "Where are we going?" And he said, "We're going to go down to Temecula, to the desert." So we flew down to Temecula. And we met a guy in the desert called Sam Puma. And Sam was a Vietnam era fighter pilot, old school guy, right? Cowboy hat. Bow-legged, with a great song for every occasion. Just a real raconteur, fantastic guy. And we had lunch with him and his wife, and I didn't know why we were there. And after lunch, Sam looked at Dave and looked at me and said, "Well, should we show him?" And I said, "Show me what?" And they took me into the desert, and sitting in the desert in this barn under a tarpaulin cover was this one remaining Berkut kit in pieces.
Wow.
And they looked at me and they said, Dave said, "This was Rick's airplane, the guy that was killed all those years ago." He said, "It's been sitting in the desert for 21 years waiting for you." And he goes, "This is going to be the last airplane we built as a book." And so I committed for nothing more than a passion project at the time to build the greatest example of the Berkut that I could possibly wish to build. And there's a bunch more serendipitous stories, but I'm not sure we have the time to go into it. But let's just say that life was saying, "Dan, build this airplane." Right? So I started building the airplane. And into my life one day, quite serendipitously, and I mean literally through an introduction, walked two other individuals, Nick Bitchnich and Glenn Snyder, who were the other co-founders of Red. Both with rich backgrounds in technology, virtual reality, and augmented reality in particular. And Glenn, back in 2015, had achieved a world first in race cars, in that he took two race cars in separate locations, put two real race car drivers in them on real racetracks, created a virtual reality system and helmet for each driver. So each put a helmet on. They met each other in a virtual world when they were in different locations, and they raced these race cars against each other in real time, blind to the outside world. And the moment I saw that, the light bulb went off. And I said, can we do that in airplanes? And they came back with technically difficult, but we think so, yeah.
Wow.
Great. But no one is going to allow us to fly around blind to the outside world in virtual reality. Can we do that in augmented reality? The distinction being that we don't disappear into an entirely virtual world, but we seek to put synthetic entities into the real world around us. Surroundings, but we see digital images overlay. And they said, absolutely not. I'm like, why would you ask that? And I said, well, because I think if we could figure out how to do that, we have an opportunity to transform pilot training and solve all of the problems that I alluded to before. Because what if we could put virtual airplanes up into the sky to provide adversary aircraft, and they could see them and fly against them? Wouldn't that be something? And so the guys, we got our heads together and we came up with a thesis that became a pitch. And that pitch we pitched to the Air Force, and that was the genesis of Red 6. And the Air Force basically said, go prove it. And over the last 3 years, we've been proving it and raising money with venture capital firms that are supporting us out of LA.
Yep.
Guys, they were the first guys to support us. And since then, we've gone on to raise a bunch more money through groups like Red Cell and Snowpoint Ventures and Octave Ventures and Iron Capital and a bunch of other folks around us that have supported the mission. Lockheed Martin, Epic Games invested in us. And over the last 3 years, we've been evolving this technology now to where it's something we've created that I think is going to usher in a new paradigm for warfighters and directly address an acutely defined pain point in national security crisis around training. Because if I can put virtual airplanes up into the real world and allow us to train against them, then I can train against any airplane we want, because it's just, and I can do that whilst offering significant financial offsets. So I think we're ushering in now a new era of what is possible through this technology of augmented reality and controlling it with artificial intelligence. It's really something to behold. And just to really sort of bookmark that, what that means is for us in Red 6, we are flying a real airplane up in the sky, wearing a headset that we're looking through, and we're seeing everything out there as we would for real. But I also see digital images of airplanes that are thinking and fighting autonomously against us. It's something to behold. We're very excited by what we've created.
It's absolutely extraordinary. And if anybody, when we give everybody your information at the end of the show about how they can find you, you have this incredible video on your website showing what it looks like sitting in the pilot's seat and seeing even the battleships, in the water and things on the ground. I have to say, I mean, to not know what your purpose is and to step into something that huge, and to also be told, no, we don't know if this can be done, and to be like, no, I think it can. It says a lot about you and your determination, and also your team, which you've surrounded yourself with. Can we talk a little bit about why, obviously the financial ramifications are huge for the service for this, but also about pilot safety and also how it enhances training as opposed to doing it in a simulator or the way pilots are trained, so that we can understand a little bit about that impact as well?
So there's two great questions there. So look, let me address the simulator question first, right? Because it kind of relates into pilot safety and why simulators have a role, but they only have a certain role. And the idea with simulators is they're very good for repetition-based tasking, right? They can, and the advanced graphics now with simulators and use of virtual reality on the ground is one thing that will give us real opportunities to train to a certain extent. But the thing with simulators you can never emulate or simulate are the real stresses and strains associated with flying combat aircraft, because believe it or not, it's an extremely violent, extremely difficult, stressful environment to operate in. It's, when you're out there and you're pulling 9Gs, it is violent. And
right.
That will kill you, right? Many people have gone unconscious and crashed airplanes as a result of G-force. And then there's the thermal considerations. There's the idea that you can run out of fuel. There's the idea that people can shoot at you. You can crash into the ground. What am I talking about here? I'm talking about risk. And all of that risk and cognitive load that is on a pilot that is doing it for real in real airplanes means that we really do need to go do it for real, right, to train. We need to be in the environment training. But the problem is that we also need aircraft to go train against, right? And so it's not an efficient way to train from a cost perspective. And now that the technology is so advanced from China and Russia and things like that, if we can't simulate those threats effectively, then what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
So my contention is that while simulators have an extremely important role to play, it is imperative that we fly. So I am not in any way, shape, or form advocating that we fly less. I'm saying that every time we fly, it should be relevant training.
Mm-hmm.
So when our pilots go up there to practice, they should be doing what they would be called to do in conflict, which is being the good guys. And to the layperson on the ground, when you see two airplanes up there training, the reality, you both think they're getting the same training. They're not. One of those guys or girls is getting the right training. The other person there being a pretend bad guy, right? And so there's a big, big opportunity cost to that, and an outright fiscal cost. So that's the first thing, and why this is. It's really important that we still do real life flying, and that's why simulators have a role. But we've now placed ourselves at an interesting intersection between live flight and virtual and simulated flight. We get the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing I'd say. To address the question on safety, here's a really interesting example. Air-to-air refueling, right? So if we take off in a fighter jet, the one thing common to all fighter aircraft around the world is we never have enough fuel. We're always running out of gas, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're always at the gas station. And the way we refuel is, generally speaking, in the air, right? So we'll send up big gas stations in the sky, big air-to-air refueling tankers. Well, you can imagine how complex that is from a skill set to teach a pilot to fly that close to another airplane deliberately, and deliberately fly your airplane into something else in the sky so you can plug in and take gas, stay in a position and hold that position. Maybe it's in turbulence, or maybe, God forbid, it's even, we do it at night as well. So it's scary during the day. It's terrifying at night, and it's absolutely terrifying at night in bad weather.
Can't imagine.
Well, you can imagine the risks associated with that. Well, guess what? First time as a student pilot you go to a tanker and exposed to tanking is the first time you go to a tanker, right? There's no practice runs. You go up there, son, and you better plug in because you're going to run out of gas, and don't bump into anything. Well, here's a concrete example of the use of augmented reality and what we've done. We have now already demonstrated multiple times that we have a augmented reality KC-46 air-to-air refueling tanker flying around the skies of Southern California. And I can go up in my real airplane and practice to my heart's content what it's like to fly an intercept on an air-to-air refueling tanker, pull in alongside it, pull up behind it, take the boom and drive the boom into my cockpit as if I was taking gas on.
Mm-hmm.
I can do that to my heart's content, getting as many repetitions and as many exposures to the pictures at zero risk, because there's nothing to bump into, right? And that's the beauty of what we've done. You think about extrapolating that out into dogfighting. We can now go and dogfight and practice those skill sets that are really complex and extremely violent and extremely stressful. We can practice those skill sets against airplanes that are not really there, that will fly and think and fight just like real airplanes, but guess what? There's nothing to bump into.
Mm-hmm.
So the questions I've been asked is this dangerous to blend the augmented world with the real world? No, it's not. It's not. We see the real world as we would for real. The only difference is the airplanes that we're flying against are not really there.
Right.
And so I would argue that actually, whilst it's way more efficient to do it in every sense in terms of relevant training at a much lower cost, it's way safer as well. And I think this technology will absolutely save lives.
I agree with you. I'm not even in that field. It just sounds to me like it makes sense. And I have had experience in the augmented and virtual reality world, and I talked about it in terms of creating exhibits, traveling exhibits for something I was working on a while ago for a museum. I think that's the future of a lot of things. And obviously COVID is forcing some of that anyway, in terms of people, how they're convening and doing all these different things. So I think you were ahead of the game. A couple more questions, and then I want to just ask in closing some questions around challenges and all of those things we talked about. But what kind of support or resistance are you getting from the branches of the service for this? Is it difficult to penetrate? Are they not convinced? Are they like, yes, bring it, but it's cost that's the issue in their mind?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question. I mean, look, the reality of it is we've got every single person that we come into contact with is hugely supportive of this technology. But the challenge always for startups is penetrating the maze that is the Department of Defense and understanding, I guess, the real challenge is how we get from research and development dollars, which are really compelling and have helped a bunch of companies through, to out of the other side of that, from research and development into programs of record, right? So where you have an established program with a budget item, aligned to it. And that's the piece of work that we're heavily focusing on right now. But to a person, I mean, everyone understands what it is we're bringing, right? And we offer such a unique cocktail of value that it scratches a lot of itches for everyone, including politicians, right? Because we're operating against fiscal constraints, especially now having the COVID relief package and stuff like that. There's only so much money to go around, and so we have to be mindful of how we spend every dollar. Well, the beauty of this technology is it gets better training, right? It makes it safer. It gives our pilots exposure to problem sets that they've never had before. But guess what? We offer massive cost savings as well. And so that is everyone. It's a technology that should be bipartisan because it scratches a lot of itches for everyone. And here's another interesting thing about it. If we are to put 50% of the airplanes up there, or we have the requirement to put 50% of the airplanes up there, and of course you can scale, you can use your airplanes for different things, but humor the point, then think about the carbon emissions we can save as well. The one thing that's consistent with fighter aircraft is all fighter pilots have a heavy left hand, right? And we throw a lot of gas out there. Well, there's a lot of potential for carbon emission offsets here as well, which is something that I think we're all passionate about.
I think that's great. Obviously, bringing climate change into the conversation is really, really important. Daniel, I was learning about your company, and that's just also extraordinary what you're doing. And honestly, kudos to you and actually all of the thought leaders who saw what you were doing and invested in you too. Shout out to them and anyone else. We'll do a call to action at the end, seeing if there's people that want to get involved from an investment standpoint, et cetera. But I want to talk a little bit about your leadership, because you have gone from, the impact that you've made. From what I understand, Red 6 gives back quite a bit in terms of your time, volunteerism, especially to veterans. Some of your employees even are volunteering in human trafficking and all of that. What is Red 6 hoping to do in terms of giving back and the way that you're leading from an emotional currency standpoint? I understand that you really care about your employees because of what you've been through. And I think leadership is a unique standpoint, especially if you come from the service and then you go into the business world. What kind of leader would you say you are? And how do you want to translate that into giving back besides just the mission that you're on?
Leadership's an interesting thing to contemplate, right? Because there are many different leadership styles that I think you have to exhibit at different points within a company's life cycle. And I've learned a lot of those lessons over the years from the cocktail of experience that I've had, right? And I've seen some tremendous leaders, like the best leaders. And I've seen some utterly terrible leaders as well. I try to draw on things I've seen done well and do the opposite of what I've seen done badly. And of course, I make tons of mistakes on a daily basis. I think, the interesting thing about leadership in the context of a startup is you go from a point where you have a good idea and you're surrounded with people that are really capable, and there's just a few of you, involved in the initial journey, to the point where inevitably you come out of the garage and you're in a transformation to a big company, and that change is uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable. Well, a lot of us, including myself, because quite honestly, the happiest days were when there were like 3 of us, 4 of us bouncing around in a hangar trying to figure out how to solve a problem, right? And you balance that kind of like trying to keep that startup culture of friends together working on something you're passionate about, with the realities of you got to grow up and you got to be you got to create a real business, and that requires different leadership styles at different times, from being really directive to sometimes just surrounding yourself with people that are way better than you and stepping back and letting them go and giving them clear guidelines. And I will say, look, honestly, it's a double-edged sword being in the role I'm in, because obviously out front telling the story of Red Six, but the reality of Red Six is I just tell the story now. I came up with a good idea and I tell the story. The really hard work is done by the other co-founders and the amazing engineering team that we're building out, and the operational leadership and the business development leadership and the administration support we have. That whole team that we've built, which has now grown to about 25 to 30 people, are all way smarter than I am, right? And they do the real work behind the scenes. I'm lucky enough to be out front telling the story. So it's leadership within the company at every level that I think has contributed to our success. And there's no real this is how you should do it. I think there's a lot of right ways and a lot of wrong ways to do it, and we try to exploit as many of the right ways and avoid the wrong ways. But I make mistakes every day.
Sure. I mean, don't we all? That's part of being human. But I do want to just, if it's okay, call out one specific thing that stuck out with me. And the reason I'm mentioning this is I'm a partner in a startup also. We're not a startup, we're a young company, but we have an executive search division. And my partner searches around this methodology called Leaders Who Care. And you clearly are a leader who cares, as are all the people in your company. And having been touched by cancer, I know that you guys did something really special. You put it on social media and you shared what you had done for one of your crew members who had unfortunately come down with cancer.
Yeah, it was interesting, actually. An extended member of the Red Six family that, look, honestly, you talk about leadership and inspiration, you don't look to me for it. Like this guy, I'll give him a shout out, Josiah. Mm-hmm. He inspired me. I stumbled across him on, I think it was Instagram or some social media platform, and he was fighting advanced stages of cancer with such a grace and humility and poise and courage that really touched me and inspired me. And I reached out to him and I said, look, to your questions about me leading, I'm nothing, right? This guy inspired me in ways that I'll carry with me forever. And I reached out to him and said, look, if you're interested in aviation or you're interested in what we're doing, just come see us. Like, I want come and have this experience with us and come be a part of the family. And he was on the East Coast, Atlanta actually, and we didn't know each other from Adam. I just extended an invitation to him. I was like, come on over here with your family. And he did, and he brought his wife and his dad with him, and they came and spent some good time with us. And he kind of just became an extended part of the Red Six family somehow. And he's still on the East Coast. We keep in touch, and he's inspiring me every day. And if you want examples of leadership and character, go look at him. Don't look at me, because he's something else.
That's great. Well, in closing, there's a few things I just wanted to touch on. I mean, that again goes back to your humility and everything that you've been through. It really speaks volumes to how you've been able to maintain this sense of humility, at the same time being able to be innovative and have leadership. I just, part of what we like to do here is to help people understand what it means to listen to yourself when you're trying to find that greater meaning in your life and step into your purpose. It isn't easy what you've taken on. I mean, it's not easy, first of all, doing any startup or any endeavor, let alone tying your purpose into it. So how important do you think it is for people to find their purpose and to listen to that? And when it's hard for them, what would you share with them in terms of how to stay the course and not give up?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And again, there's no magic formula to it. So I'll just give you anecdotes from my own experiences. Mm-hmm. First of all, it's about being absolutely true to yourself. And I think to be true to yourself, you have to be introspective and reflect deeply on who you are as a human being, what's important to you. And that involves being quiet, right? And sitting with yourself and really thinking, like, who am I about? One of the questions I asked myself, I alluded to it earlier in the conversation, I'm like, if time is finite, but I don't think we always think of it as finite, right? If I said to you, hey, a month out, it's game over, how would you live truthfully and how would you spend your time, right? Or if money wasn't a thing, right, and it didn't exist and it wasn't something we had to chase, how would you live truthfully? And I happen to believe that financial success and professional success and all those things come as a byproduct of focusing on something that you're extremely passionate about and pouring your heart and soul into solving that. Mm-hmm. And all stuff will come from it. If you chase that stuff for the sake of chasing it, it can prove to be elusive, but it can also prove to make you deeply unhappy as well, right, in your soul. So that's the first thing I'd say about finding a purpose. It's like, what would you do for free?
Mm-hmm.
What do you love? What's your unique skill sets? What do you believe in? And then follow it with every ounce of your passion, and believe that if you do that, you'll probably do it better than anyone else, and someone will ultimately pay you for that. There it is. Being an entrepreneur is terrifying, right? And being a CEO as an entrepreneur is really scary because you feel responsible for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times where you wake up in the morning, it's like, gosh, I got to get out and grind. This is extremely difficult, right? And there are times where you're just ecstatically happy, and it's a wonderful journey to be on, and you're so proud of all the achievements you make. So the life of an entrepreneur is like this.
Mm-hmm.
I think, core to keeping you anchored is that shoreline of what is your spine, what is your purpose, what are you gunning towards? Do you believe in the vision? And it's very easy to waver off, right? But if you have a single focus of that's my vision, that's what I'm tracking towards, and you apply all of your willpower to it, I think that's generally how you'll find your sense of purpose. And it's just staying aligned to that and knowing that life's gonna kick the crap out of you at times, right?
Right, absolutely.
Reality of life, and you got to dust yourself off and get back in the fight, and keep doing that. I think you'll be successful over time, but it is difficult for sure.
Great. And this is going a little longer than my usual episodes, but I think it's really important. There's one thing I want to make sure we end with. You just touched on something, and you did earlier with your father. The idea, I know from what I understand about you, that you very much value understanding what mental health is and understanding what self-care is.
Sure.
And especially in a world of a CEO and of a male CEO, when, in this world of, we're hearing about toxic masculinity, when it's not okay to feel vulnerable, it's not okay to share that you're struggling. You just, you had that experience with your father. I would love to know what you would say to any CEO, but especially males, especially people in leadership that are struggling with mental health and not feeling those fears and not knowing how to reach out.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? I think it's really, really important.
I'm really passionate about it for sure, because it's impacted my family in such a obviously catastrophic way. And from being young and dealing with my dad and seeing patterns of behavior and a reluctance through ego or culture or this male bravado to not seek help, but to see this as so disingenuous, right? And to see that you're spinning a narrative of I'm fine, when clearly you're not fine. Clearly things are getting worse. And I lament daily the fact that I wasn't able to influence that in a more effective way with my dad, because I pleaded with him to get help. And so I see mental health in exactly the same way as I see physical health. It's like going to the gym, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got to work it out. And everyone in the world, I don't care who you are, everyone struggles from time to time. And if you deny that you do, I just don't believe you. So everyone's got their battles.
Mm-hmm.
The reality of it is, I think as a CEO particularly, and it is different being a CEO to any other position, because the buck stops with you, right? And leadership is a very lonely place at times.
Mm-hmm.
So what I try to do for myself is regular check-ins. I am a big believer in therapy for sure. I'm absolutely disciplined in making sure that I'm doing that once a week and checking in with myself. And all the way through my dad's death and every the stresses and strains that I was under over in the UK, I would regularly check in, because I needed that outlet and I needed that touch point for someone to say, hey, this is how I'm feeling. And because as a leader, who do you turn to, right? You're supposed to be, out there leading, and everyone looks to you as if you're, immune to all this stuff. And therapy is a big part of my life, and I'm a huge believer in it, and it's incredibly important. And I think, key to that is just dropping the ego and understanding that, that you need support for sure.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you can get rid of ego and I don't need it, I'm all that kind of stuff, it becomes empowering. And I think you actually start to become stronger and stronger and stronger as a human being. So I would absolutely advocate that if there are people out there that are struggling or feel they need to talk to someone, go do it, because I do, and it's really, really, really important to me.
Great. Thank you so much. I really wanted to make sure we talked about that because you're so impressive on so many levels, and people from the outside would think, oh, what a tough guy. He probably doesn't have any feelings, or, who knows what people perceive. And the fact that you could share that in a very vulnerable way, feelings and vulnerability is powerful, and feeling what you're feeling is powerful. And so I really admire you for doing what you do in that arena also, and for letting people feel it like it's a safe thing to do.
I appreciate it, but I think we need to get away from this even being an issue, because it's just, as my mind,
agree.
It's part of the human condition, and it's not wrong.
I agree.
So if you approach it in that paradigm, it's like going to the gym.
Great. I love it. Well, Daniel, this is the longest episode I've ever done, but it's just amazing. And I really thank everyone so much for tuning in, because you just have I could do like 3 hours on you. I'm sure everyone says that when they interview you. You are extraordinary, as is your team, I'm sure, as is everyone in your world who loves you and knows you. And I just feel so deeply honored and touched you would take your valuable time to share your story on A World on Purpose. I think it really will help people understand what it means to live a purpose-driven life, to go through adversity, and to take that leap of faith. And so thank you so much for coming on. And before we leave, I would love to for you to tell people where they could find you, and do a call to action if you have any, whether it's investors, whether it's people trying out your product. Please tell people where they can find you and what you need to succeed.
Sure. Well, Instagram, you can find me on Instagram at Red6CEO. That's the number 6, so Red number 6 CEO. The website's a great resource. red6ar.com is a great place to go. And in terms of call to action, just keep tracking what we're doing. We're building what I think is a vision of the future that's incredibly important for national security. And don't be under any illusions. There is a big threat out there that we need to counter. But this tech has the ability to change, lives in very meaningful ways beyond the military. And I think we're ushering in a new paradigm in what is possible with augmented reality.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel, for coming today. And everyone, you can also find all of Daniel's information, everything about him and Red 6 at the A World on Purpose website. In addition, please go check them out. It's pretty cool to watch their video on their website. And we will follow you as well along the way, so that we can keep everybody up to date. And we're really excited to see what you guys do. So thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Alyssa. I appreciate the time.
You're welcome. And thanks everyone for tuning into A World on Purpose. I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher Harris. Thank you for coming back every week to listen to extraordinary humans like Daniel, who are living their life with purpose, for purpose, and on purpose. Have a great day. Thank you for taking this journey into A World on Purpose with our incredible guests. To learn more about our amazing guests and their inspiring purpose-driven work, please go to aworldonpurpose.com. Don't forget to look at our call to action of the week to mobilize your desire for purpose into action. A World on Purpose can be found on Apple Podcasts and all the major podcast platforms, and the video version can be found on YouTube. If what you heard today inspires you, please write a review and like and share on the platform of your choice. We'd love to also hear from you and learn your pivot to purpose and the meaningful work that you do that lifts humanity. Send your stories to info@aworldonpurpose.com. I'd like to thank our World on Purpose team for making this show a reality. Once again, I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher Harris. Thank you for tuning in to A World on Purpose. I look forward to seeing you soon.